the ashfall has been significant and the tsunami waves have been destructive, but we don't know the extent of the damage. So the challenge is nobody is in contact with anybody on the island, and therefore we are all a bit in the dark about exactly the scale of damage or what people are experiencing. So we imagine one of the greatest needs is to provide water purification and clean drinking water. We imagine that is priority number one, actually, because of the ashfall. Secondly, anyone living in the coastal areas may well have had their houses damaged by the tsunami waves. So shelter is a second humanitarian concern. And because communications have been so compromised, people will have lost contact with their loved ones, and therefore restoring those family links is a third priority for us. It could be with a population of around 100,000 and with 70% of them living on one island, and with that island being heavily affected, we're roughly thinking up to 80,000 people could be affected. But how many of them are seriously affected?
5 minutes later.
Today, the first satellite images emerged of the Pacific nation of Tonga following Saturday's volcanic eruption. The photos show the islands coated in ash. Despite the violent explosion, the Tongan government has so far reported just 3 deaths. The status of 2 smaller islands in its chain is still unknown. John Yang takes a closer look at the science behind the volcano, its explosion and aftermath.
Judy, scientists say the explosion revealed some of the mysteries of underwater volcanoes. It produced a tsunami that was felt on the coasts of Japan and the United States, 5,000 miles away, and triggered an oil spill in Peru. It set off a lightning storm that lasted 7 hours and had 400,000 strikes. It was heard as far away as Alaska. But for all the ways that made itself felt around the world, its damage was relatively confined. Tonga bore the brunt of the volcano's fury, blanketed with ash that's now contaminating its water supply. Michael Poland is a research geophysicist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington. Mr. Poland, thanks so much for joining us. As we talk about, that was so dramatic. This event, that huge plume that was visible from space, the tsunami, the atmospheric shock wave which rippled around the globe. But you say that the data actually show this was a relatively small eruption. Explain that.
Yeah, it's a very confounding event in that the amount of material that came out of the ground was not especially huge. It was perhaps the kind of thing we might see every few years from a volcano somewhere on Earth. But it produced an outsized explosion, really a massive explosion, and that has to have something to do with the interaction with ocean water. It produced that really massive tsunami, so it's having really outsized impacts for the amount of material that came out of the ground.
And what was in that material? What did come out of the ground?
Well, there was a lot of ash that came out, of course, as with most volcanic eruptions, and SO2 gas, among other types of gas, water vapor and so forth. And that sulfur dioxide really allows us to pinpoint where the plume is and how big.
A few minutes later.
The explosion has now been dubbed as the world's biggest volcanic eruption in more than 30 years. The true scale of destruction is only now coming to light. 2 deaths from the disaster are now confirmed, and scientists are warning that the Tonga eruption may damage the environment for years to come. Welcome to Beyond's Climate Tracker. My name is Priyanka Sharma. A volcano that exploded on the Pacific island nation of Tonga has now almost disappeared from view. Large parts of the country currently remain covered in grey dust. Other parts of the island nation were damaged by a tsunami. In fact, New Zealand said that 2 people have now been confirmed as killed, citing Tonga police on the island. One of the 2 confirmed dead was Angela Glover, a 50-year-old British woman who ran a stray animals charity. She was reported missing by her husband after the tsunami hit. It has been 3 days since the Tonga volcano exploded. The eruption cloaked Tonga in a film of ash, triggering a Pacific-wide tsunami and releasing shock waves that wrapped around the entire planet. But with phone lines still down and an undersea internet cable cut, the true toll of the dual eruption tsunami disaster is not yet known. Satellite images released showed just the open sea, where most of the volcanic structures stood above sea level a few days ago, only two relatively small volcanic islands were still visible above sea level after the eruption. New Zealand released aerial images taken from a surveillance flight revealing a tree-lined coast transformed from green to completely grey by the volcanic fallout. Wrecked buildings were visible on the foreside, alongside others that appeared intact. The eruption was so powerful that it was recorded around the world and